let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that
It's actually a big piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours. I am Andrew Sullivan, joined by my amazing and awesome co-host, Mr. Jonny Rickard. Happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, Sully. I'm doing my best. How are you?
I can't complain. I am at an on-site offsite. So I'm in Red Hat Tower, right? So I'm sitting in I may or may not have commandeered my boss's office today. So
Nice.
that's anytime you see these signs behind me, that's when I've commandeered my boss's office. Anyways, so our product marketing team is here in town. So I've spent the last day and a half sitting with them, and it's a whole different world out there. Like, officially my title is technical marketing, right? But like we skew way over on the technical side. So going in and hearing them talk about, marketing campaigns and like how to interact with all these other things and what this does and collecting metrics on this, it's just like whoosh, like right over my head. So it's a stark reminder of any company, like Red Hat. Red Hat is a technology company, right? You look at Red Hat and we are driven sort of from the bottom up by our engineers and the folks who are, creating Red Hat Enterprise Linux and OpenShift and Ansible and all of that. But there's just this huge machine of things that turn, Red Hat from, a bunch of Linux engineers into a company that's able to do things. And it's always interesting and humbling to see that part of the machine at work. So
It's like the Matrix, right? Like when you're down below, you're just kind of in it and you don't really know that you're in it, and then you take the red pill, I think, and then you're out and you're like, holy crap, it's a monster.
yeah, and it's again, I don't know that I'm smart on a lot of the technical things anymore. Like I feel like I'm good at asking questions, and I know who to ask for answers and stuff like that. But again, humbling to see just how other people in other areas, things that I have basically no knowledge of, how they work and all that other stuff. And it's really fun to see different people's passions and stuff. I really like it.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Like when you think about like like Andrew 2 years ago, right, or Johnny 2 years ago, or whatever, right? And it's like, okay, you could ask me anything about like the OpenShift deployment 3 years ago, and I could have told you like where it was at and the thing, like how to troubleshoot it, how to look at it, all that. And then as you get more and more, you're doing more and more, right? Now it's like, okay, well, ask me about something else. I can still tell you generally where to go, but now it's like there's some atrophy there. But I think now, like as we get older and we become more senior, as senior technical citizens, our best qualities are like knowing where to point to, right? Like, okay, I might not know the answer off the top of my head now, but if you go talk to Sully will know this, or go talk to Tommy or whoever, right? So.
Yep. Yeah, we just went through that chain, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. We used to do the same thing when I was in a Linux administrator. Unix administrator. I was doing RHEL and Solaris way back in the day.
Oh yes.
When we used to do technical interviews, and it was one of those like I would always try and get folks like ask the most esoteric, crazy, like nobody's ever going to know the answer question, and it was mostly because I just wanted to know if you knew where to go for help.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the, option for the ls command that does blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, nobody's going to know that off the top of my hand. There's like 400 different options for ls, or CP or MD or, or not MD, but make dir, like there's all of these different things. And it's like, oh, well, the first thing I'd try doing is doing a man on, like, okay. So yeah, anyways. Relying on others and finding those things is definitely a lesson that it's taken me, a few years to learn. And
yeah. When I do interviews, I like to start them off with like, hey, I'm not here to like bully you into answering questions. So if you don't know something, don't dig yourself in a hole, right? Just say I don't know, and because to me that's a strong quality, right? If you can swallow your pride, but I don't know this, So that's where like, hey, how many like 3-letter commands can you name? and then just let them go and see how far they'll go, or 2-letter commands, and then just kind of like let them get to a point to where they're like, okay, I don't know, I would have to look. It's like, all right, cool. But as long as you can get them to like say, hey, I don't know, instead of like, oh, just making stuff up, and then you're like, oh, really? Because then that's when it gets nasty. That you
Yeah.
just start digging.
That's a fun one. How many 2-letter commands can you name off the top of your
Yeah.
head?
Taylor Biggs, man, he's the one, he did that to me, so I've carried the torch.
All right. Well, to our audience, welcome y'all. Thanks for joining us today. Aside from Jonny and I, this stream is not just Jonny and I bantering with each other and chatting about, reminiscing about the old days when we weren't, well, at least I wasn't quite so gray bearded. I'm turning into a Linux graybeard, right? I'm turning into a stereotype. That's all I got.
Yeah, good though.
So today's topic is OpenShift virtualization, and in particular, what are some of the new things in OpenShift 4.17 and OpenShift Virtualization 4.17, which are both available now, that are relevant for virtualization administrators. So I've got a few slides for some things to walk through and kind of explain what I think are the highlighted features. But I've also got a cluster that's up and running. We'll talk about that in a moment because there's a bunch of red things in that cluster, and I'll explain why. But I'll go through and I'll poke at a few things, show off a few things, and how all that stuff looks. And then ultimately, this is one of the office hours live streams. So what that means is whatever y'all want to ask about, whatever y'all want to talk about, ask the questions, right? Whether you're watching us on YouTube, whichever YouTube channel, whether you're watching us on Twitch, post your questions into the chat. We'll do our best to answer those. They all get cross-posted across all the different platforms. So we'll do our best to answer those here on the live stream. If we cannot get those answers or we don't know the answer, then we'll just follow up in one of the later streams and make sure we can get those. If you're not watching us live, and I know most people, when we look at the stats for the streams, by far most people do not watch us live, and that's perfectly fine. But I also hear from folks that a lot of folks like to listen to us like it's a podcast, which I always thought was interesting. Anyways, if you're not watching us live, feel free to reach out to us via email as well. So it's Sully, Sully at redhat.com, or Jonny, Jonny at redhat.com. We love to get to questions. We love hearing from y'all. Any requests, suggestions, etc. for topics that you have, we love to get those too. Most of the time it's Jonny and I either randomly brainstorming things or, hey, this looks cool, or we'll also get a number of the product folks will come and say, hey, we really want to show off our thing, product engineering, etc. So we love all of those things, but we love the ones that you all request from us most of all. So please don't hesitate to send those suggestions over. With that, I think we've only got one, really one top of mind thing today, right?
Yes. Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. So there is an internal campaign, and Sully, please jump in here for any additional information that you have. But
yeah, you might have to put that in presentation.
Yeah. So there is a campaign and going on within the community to where we want to celebrate our top OpenShift user, right? So basically, looking at the slide, right, we want the builder, we want the advocate, and we want the ambassador, right? So Sully probably qualifies for most of these. Andy Block, I could imagine being one of them. But you, the viewers, if you're using OpenShift and there's something that or if you know somebody that's actually using OpenShift and you want them to be represented here, go ahead and cast your vote. I think that this would be awesome, just to get called out. And then, Sully, I don't know if we can do something like after KubeCon or whatever, just to kind of get an idea of. I don't even know if we'll be able to see who all got nominated, but to maybe call them out, almost like we do in our company meeting with the anniversaries and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think, and I can chat with the Commons, or Jonny, you can chat with the Commons folks. They should be done with the. So sorry, I'm gonna tangent for a moment. So the Commons organization and the execution of Commons is now under a new set of folks. And where my brain just ran off in a weird direction because I was getting ready to say, oh, we should ask the Commons people to confirm. Is they're actually, all of them are over in that other meeting that I was just talking about, and they were doing a marshmallow challenge when I left them, which is. You have one marshmallow, 20 pieces of pasta, and then I think it's 1 meter of string and 1 meter of tape. And you're supposed to build a structure to get the marshmallow as high as possible or something like that. But they should be done with that by now. So anyways, what I was going to say is I this doesn't have to be this, the ambassador, the builder, right? It's not Red Hat folks. Right? It's you all.
Right.
It's people in the community. It's the administrator that you sit next to every single day, or the developer that's been working on an application for the last 6 months or a year, and is being an ambassador internally inside of your organization or externally, as the case may be. Nominate all of those people. I know that they are really, they're less interested in people like me. I see the Commons folks all the time. They don't care to see me anymore, right? It's you all. It's our community. It's the folks who are using OpenShift that they care about. So
Yeah.
Please do. And I don't know if that document is publicly accessible, Jonny? I have no idea. I see you posted the Google Docs link, but
I think so. Question mark. Let me try it on my other profile really quick.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyways, so yeah, it's a community award, not a Red Hat associate award. Jamie says yes, it is accessible. So there you go.
Our Hope 9 had my like when I first saw that, I was like, Our Hope 9 was one of the first ones that kind of came up because of like just the amount of time that we've spent with we've spent virtually with over the last couple of years on the stream, and then just going back and forth and email and stuff like that. So another one would be like Dwayne Branch. That's another one I would nominate.
Yep. Yeah. A number of folks who have been long time watchers of the stream. We see them out in the various Slack channels and the other places that everybody's at. So yeah, don't hesitate to nominate whoever you feel is appropriate for each one of those. So with that being said, I don't think Jonny, do you want to talk about upcoming schedule now or towards the end?
Let's do it towards the end.
Okay.
Because we can do it towards the end. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, then that was the only one that the other top of mind thing that I had for today, which I was going to bring up, is OpenShift Virtualization 4.17 released yesterday. But when we decided to change today's topic, that one became a part of the course topic, so I decided not to talk about it. Let's see. So without further ado, I'm going to bring this up. Let's see. Share this guy. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Here we go. All right. So as I said at the beginning, today's topic, I really want to focus on OpenShift features that are relevant to virtualization admins, as well as things that are happening inside of OpenShift virtualization itself that deserve probably to be highlighted, as things that are significant changes. So first and foremost, I want to point out that this is not the full set of things that are happening inside of OpenShift virtualization. Right. If you want to see kind of the full list and a better list, if we go over here to docs.openshift.com, yes, I know I've been advocating for docs.redhat.com. This is just muscle memory. Please forgive me. If I come down here to the virtualization tab, so you see I'm at 4.17, and then I look at the release notes. So this is sort of the full set of things that have changed. So I'm going to dig into some of these as well. I'll also point out that there are a number of blog posts that the product management team is going to be publishing and stuff like that that'll dig into various other aspects here too. So fear not, however you consume your Red Hat information, we will have all of these things out there and available. Yeah. So let's look at some slides. So what's new for virtualization admins? So first, at a highlights level, this is just meant to be the single slide. Here's the type of things that you should know at a glance. I'm going to dive into each one of these in some detail. Well, most of these, I should say. So GPU workload on hosted clusters. So this bullet right here in the middle, I'm not going to talk about that one. Effectively what that is, so hosted clusters is referring to hosted control planes. So this is being able to pass through GPU and vGPU devices when using a node pool to provision a hosted control plane cluster on OpenShift virtualization. That was a mouthful. So if you're not familiar with hosted control planes, we've talked about that a few times. Effectively, what hosted control planes does is it allows a cluster to host the control plane workload for a different cluster. So, Andrew has a cluster, Jonny has a cluster. Andrew's cluster, rather than deploying, 3 control plane nodes and, 5 worker nodes, instead, I rely on Jonny's cluster to host my control plane workload. And then I just have my 5 worker nodes. And further, when I'm using that model, if I choose to, I can use node pools, which are driven by Cluster API, in order to provision nodes, worker nodes for my cluster. So there's a few different platforms that's supported with. I want to say OpenShift virtualization is for sure. Now I'm forgetting which ones are officially supported or not. Bare Metal is another
AWS,
one.
yeah,
AWS.
AWS self-managed is now supported since like
Okay.
4.16, I think. So
Yeah, so that's where that one comes into play. So really helpful when you're wanting to have multiple hosted control plane clusters, as well as having AI GPU, um, any workload that requires GPUs. I'll get my brain in order and my thoughts out in a in a
it'll happen.
consumable fashion at some point, probably, maybe. So that could be AI, that could be the workstation use case, right? So persistent VMs that are acting as workstations for whatever particular group or application you're running. The other one that I wanted to point out, so tangential to our previous topic, which is disconnected clusters. So you can see down there in the middle here. So this easily deploy disconnected hosted clusters. So previously, hosted control planes in disconnected was not supported. There was a few different reasons why that I'm not remembering at the moment, but they've basically fixed that. And now for most use cases in most scenarios, you can deploy disconnected hosted control plane clusters. And then the other one that I won't talk about today is MTV 2.7. I would definitely, if you're using the migration toolkit for virtualization or MTV, definitely recommend updating to 2.7. It is not dependent on OpenShift virtualization 4.17, so far as I know. But you can see there that there's some pretty good improvements in here, right? Preserving static IPs and drive letters is an awesome one, so definitely recommend making that upgrade if you're using it. So improved virtualization admin user experience. So these are sort of the marketing titles or the marketing things that we're using here to describe what this is. So what we've effectively done here is added a dedicated user interface or console, if you will, for virtualization. So let's switch over to my cluster here. So this is my OpenShift 4.17 cluster. I say it's my cluster. It's technically Alan's cluster. So Alan, I don't know if you're watching today. Thank you for allowing me to commandeer your cluster for the last couple of days. So one thing to note, so yes, I am running 4.17.0. You'll also notice that there's a bunch of red that's happening here. So right, I've got one critical issue, which is this down here. So I attempted to install and I'll talk about this more in a moment, the new descheduler profile, and the version of the descheduler that I'm using doesn't support the new option. Well, why doesn't it support that, Andrew? Well, it's because I deployed a nightly version of OpenShift Virtualization 4.17. So regular production 4.17 OpenShift, but then if I come over here to my installed operators, we can see here that I'm using a nightly build of OpenShift Virtualization, which is why some things don't quite work the way they're supposed to, and that's why I have some red in my cluster. So the virtualization console view. So this is in tech preview right now, and the goal is to provide a targeted or maybe a reduced console experience for virtualization admins. Right? When you think of virtualization, right, you care about a certain subset of things inside of the cluster. Right? I care about, of course, all of my virtualization things that are happening inside of here, right? Seeing all of my VMs, being able to manage the virtual machines that are inside of here. At the cluster level, right, I really only care about the overview, seeing what's happening here. Networking, right, my virtual machines need to connect to the outside world, so I want to manage things like node network state and node network and configuration policies to do host level network config, network attachments for virtual machine level networking config. Storage down here, I care about the PVs and PVCs for my virtual machines. It's the same thing with observability, right? It's things that are targeted to the virtualization admin. And the rationale being, when I look at the main administrator view, there's just a lot of clutter here that I don't care about if I'm a Vert person, right? So think builds. I am probably not going to use builds with my virtual machines, right? It is technically possible that you can use builds in order to manage components of that. You can even use builds if you're creating or deploying applications that are partially containerized and partially virtualized, right? But as a Vert admin, I probably don't care about that. right? Same thing if we look up here, like under workloads, right? I generally don't care about most of these things, right? Daemon sets, replica sets, replication controllers, HPA doesn't work with virtualization, right? Pod disruption budgets we don't have to worry about because the virtual machines live migrate. So, so there's just the goal being we want to simplify, we want to provide a tailored experience that is just less intimidating and less overwhelming with things that aren't really relevant and aren't really important.
Is
Um,
there an RBAC that allows you to only see this, so that way you don't see, or maybe you only see like the developer and the virtualization, not all three, or is it
um,
like
that is a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. So I
okay?
am a cluster admin in here. So the normal RBAC rules are going to apply. So for
Mhm.
example, if I don't have, if I'm not a cluster admin, if I don't have the ability to look and see, for example, the node centric things down here, I wouldn't be able to see those options down here.
Okay,
So for right now, this is just a subset of the menu items over here um, from the administrator view.
got it.
There are plans, and we can talk about this as we get further down. There are plans from the product management team and the engineering teams where they're working on making more robust changes to this virtualization view to make it just, I'm going to say, better and easier for virtualization use cases.
Okay,
Right? How can I make it as familiar and easy as possible to do various things? So one of the ones I'll pick on, right, today. So let's look at my virtual machines. Right, I've only got one virtual machine, so it doesn't really matter. But what if I had 5 or 10 or 100 virtual machines inside of here, and I wanted to take 8 of those and reboot them? Right? Today, the way that I have to do that is I have to go to each one individually and select the restart option, and then I go to the next one and I select the restart option. I don't have a multi-select. So being able to do things like add multi-select so that I can tick the box and then go up and say group action, for all of these virtual machines, reboot them, would be great. So that's one of the things that they're looking at is how can we add that type of features and functionality to that. And I'll point out, you, our audience, if you have feedback on this, if there's things that you would like to see, things that you think would be interesting and helpful if you're managing virtual machines, please let us know. Reach out to me. You can reach out to me directly, Sully, Sully at redhat.com. It's on the screen there. We would love to get your feedback and know what that means and what it looks like and what would make your life easier in that regard. I want to catch up on chat here.
Yeah, there's a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the first one is from Load, and the question is easy Kubernetes or OpenShift? And I assume that question means, should I start with Kubernetes, or which is easier, Kubernetes or OpenShift?
So I think the way that I'll answer this is Kubernetes is arguably easier because it is simpler, right? OpenShift is a superset of Kubernetes. It is Kubernetes with a bunch of things added on top of it. So if you learn Kubernetes, then you automatically know 90% of OpenShift. However, I think OpenShift is probably easier overall. And I say that because OpenShift does a lot of things for you. So it depends on what your goals are and kind of what you want to learn and how you want to use that Kubernetes OpenShift cluster. So what do I mean by it does a bunch of stuff for you? Like if you're deploying a vanilla Kubernetes cluster, right, there's a bunch of things that you have to do, not the least of which is install an operating system and then configure kubelet and configure all the other things and instantiate the cluster and have etcd available to it and all those other things. OpenShift does all of that for you. I walk through the installation process. Assisted installer is is kind of the one that we generically recommend these days. So I use assisted installer. I instantiate my cluster, and I didn't have to think about or care about any of that. Right? It automatically installs CoreOS to the nodes for us. It instantiates the control plane services and all of that. I can go in if I'm using a supported platform, AWS or vSphere or whatever. I can have it automatically deploy new nodes in the cluster for me. All these other things. So how much magic do you want to use versus how much of the underlying, or versus how much of the magic do you want to learn, right? Type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when I was reading that, my first response was like, well, it depends. If you're going bit for bit parity, then OpenShift is by far the easiest, right? But if you're just going for an install experience where it's like, oh, where can I get the fastest thing going, you know, and I don't care what the features are, then yeah, okay, kubeadm is actually really simple, or Minikube or whatever. But yeah. And then the second question was about it's from Hi regarding MTV warm migration. Which source VM infrastructure does it support? Does it support warm migration from OpenStack to OpenShift virtualization?
I believe it is vSphere. vSphere is the source for when doing warm migrations. I don't think OpenStack for warm migrations is supported. I don't know if any of the product team is watching the stream. I'm sure that, oh, there's Peter. So I don't know if Peter knows the answer to that off the top of his head, but I'm relatively sure that it is only vSphere that supports warm migrations.
That was all. Yeah, those were the last questions.
Okay. Yeah, I was just reading this from KNA about serverless. OpenShift with agent-based installer will get you a cluster in very little time. Yes. So there's actually been an internal thread that's been going around. Jonny, I don't know if you saw it on the SME list. So I've started to take the approach of like kind of two core installation experiences that are actually kind of overlapping. So if you are using an internet connected infrastructure or environment, I always generically recommend the assisted installer experience. Right? It's way easier, right? You go into, console.redhat.com, you click create new cluster, and it walks you through that whole process. I want to create a cluster on premises. I want it, to have these things. It spits out an ISO. You boot the nodes to that ISO, they pop into the interface, and you click, these 3 are my control plane nodes, these however many are my worker nodes, and it goes from there. So you can use that same experience on premises, but you have to use ACM in order to do that. So if you have ACM, you can do it on-prem, either connected or disconnected, but you still have to get to cluster 0. You still have to have that first cluster in order to deploy ACM onto it. And to Peter's point, if you're doing it disconnected in particular, agent-based is a great way of doing that. So agent-based it's effectively the same, boot and ISO experience for installing the cluster, but I prep the ISO using the command line. So it's an OpenShift install CLI command. So I feed it in, configuration files that say for this node, here's the static IP configuration, right? Here's the, where the load balancer is located, all that type of stuff. It generates me an ISO, and I boot all my nodes using that ISO, and they find each other and instantiate a cluster. So both of those are great. And then, so for cluster 0 disconnected agent-based, clusters 1 through N use the ACM infrastructure environments experience. MTV can warm migrate from Rev too. That's good to know.
And you confirm not from OpenStack.
Yeah. Let's see where I've completely gotten off track here. So I talked about the multi-select, right? Things like that. Just literally, and Peter in chat, Peter's one of the product managers for OpenShift virtualization, and I'm sure he will vouch for. We desperately want to hear your feedback on this. So if you have thoughts, suggestions, requests for what a virtualization admin GUI experience would look like, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, Sully, SULLY at redhat.com. We can run Oracle RAC on OpenShift virtualization. I think the answer to that is technically yes. RAC is a little bit different. I know that there are some requirements, so I might have to confirm. But I think it's one of those technically yes, but it's a support gray area from Oracle's perspective. So check with Oracle, ask them what they support and what they don't support. I believe that the answer today is, you can deploy Oracle database onto, RHEL, onto Oracle Enterprise Linux, whatever, on OpenShift virtualization. And they will support that database product until they determine that there's something at the hypervisor level that's that might be causing the issue, and then they would request that you move it to a supported hypervisor. I think that's the answer, but of course, check with Oracle because they're the ones who would have to support it to get the most valid, most concrete answer there. Are SAP and Oracle production workloads on OpenShift Virt supported by them? Again, I think Oracle, I just said, I don't think that they have certified OpenShift virtualization. So it would be like a tier down thing of they would support it until they decide or until they think that the hypervisor is at fault. SAP is a little different. So far as I know, SAP has not certified OpenShift virtualization. And so I don't think that they would support it at all when it's running there. So completely up to you as to whether or not you're willing to take that risk with your organization. I would say in both of those cases, Red Hat, me and Jonny or Peter or whoever on the product team going to Oracle and SAP and saying, hey, our customers would love for you to certify this and love for you to support this, doesn't carry nearly the same amount of weight as you all going to Oracle and SAP and saying, hey, we would really like for you to support your products on top of OpenShift virtualization. Even though it's literally the same exact request, it just carries a lot more weight coming directly from customers. Can we utilize OpenShift virtualization as worker nodes with hosted control planes? Yes, absolutely. So you can use there is an OpenShift virtualization provider or CNV provider for hosted control planes. You can use that. I believe you can also use the bare metal provider. So effectively, and I may be out over my skis here, talking out of turn. I think you can, create a new VM, boot it to the ISO, and it'll pop in, and then you can use hosted control planes and a node pool to go in and just ingest that node. So it's running on OpenShift virtualization, but it's not integrated with the platform at all at that point.
And I can reach out to Adele and those guys too, and see see what that workflow would look like.
Yeah, and Bosco, I know that there is, for anybody who keeps up with the OpenShift virtualization stuff, our ecosystem team is, doing just monumental work in working across the ecosystem, across all of the different, partners that we have in order to, get their workloads certified. What do we need to do to get your application, your workload certified with OpenShift virtualization? Some of them, they say, oh, it's KVM. It's literally the same KVM that's in RHEL. And so they're good with it, right? It's okay. That's all we need to know. Some of them want to do additional testing, right? Stuff like that. So it just depends on which one. Definitely raise any of those requests up through your account team or send them over to me. Sully at redhat.com. We'll make sure that they go on the big list, and we'll make sure that the ecosystem team is aware of those. Is Red Hat, I'm not sure what over migration from VMware. You can, so using the migration toolkit for virtualization, you can migrate virtual machines from vSphere into OpenShift virtualization. So that process is, it's relatively straightforward. I don't think I have MTV. I don't think I have MTV deployed to this cluster. No, I don't. So it's using MTV. There's a number of videos on it. If you look on the OpenShift YouTube channel, you deploy it into your OpenShift cluster. You give it vSphere credentials and point it out to at the vCenter, and then you go in and say, I want to take this VM or these 7 VMs or these 700 VMs, and I want to import them. It'll ask you things like, oh, disks that are in this data store on the VMware side, what storage class do you want them to land in on the OpenShift side? And network adapters that are connected to this port group on the VMware side, what network attachment definition should they use on the OpenShift side? Stuff like that. You click the go button and it goes and does its thing. So it recreates the geometry of the VM on the OpenShift side, and it copies the disk data from source to destination. Can have hosted control plane host the control planes and have bare metal worker node in that cluster. Yes, Jacob, absolutely. And yes, Dell can help there. Dell has multiple solutions in that regard. So if you're a Dell customer, definitely reach out to them. Recommend solution for backup virtual machine on OpenShift virtualization. Currently, we use some solution as Veeam and Net Backup. Traditional Veeam does not work with OpenShift virtualization, but Kasten by Veeam does work with OpenShift virtualization. So Net Backup, I think we're on their roadmap. I would have to check with them, or you can ask them. Veritas just released their support last week. So wait, is Veritas Net Backup? I've just confused myself.
I feel like that sounds right, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
It's been a while since I had to think about the backup ecosystem. Well, let's find out. So Veritas OpenShift virtualization. October 3rd. So yeah, Net Backup. There you go. So yes, Net Backup does work. Where did that ding come from? Is I the only one who heard that? Oh, it's this thing. Sorry, in my ear, I heard this random like chime. Like, where in the world did that come from? It's their chat agent down here in the
corner. Where are
you? So Alan Kells, if he's watching, he's probably cursing me right now because he created a demo of that whole thing, actually using this very cluster that we're looking at. So I believe that is officially Net Backup support that was released last week.
Nice.
Let's see. We have OpenShift on bare metal and using them for host control planes. And in the same cluster, worker nodes would like to run VMs, which will be workers. Yes, K&A, that does work. So effectively, let's look at my cluster here. I need to switch to the admin view. So if I come down here to compute and my bare metal hosts. So this cluster is 3 bare metal nodes at the moment. So I can use hosted control planes to deploy control plane workload onto these 3 nodes. And I can also host virtual machines, OpenShift virtualization virtual machines on these same 3 nodes for each of those clusters. What I cannot do, however, is I cannot deploy virtual machines hosted on this cluster on these nodes that then join back into the same cluster as virtual nodes. So that would not be supported. It would technically work, but it would not be supported because then you end up with a chicken and egg type of scenario, or horse and cart, or surely there's some non-animal related way of saying that. But yeah, PPDM does backup for Kubernetes. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jacob. Yeah, PPDM targeting Q1 2025 for support. There's a number of others. So what I will recommend, and I can't believe I forgot about this until just now. So if you go to red.ht/works-with-virt, if I include the S, works with virt, so you'll land at this page. So this page has all of the different things that work with, did I mistype it? No, oh, they've just changed the page, or something is happening where it's not rendering correctly. I don't know what's happening here. Anyways, this page, which is not rendering correctly for me for some reason, has the whole list of different ecosystem partners that work with OpenShift virtualization. Importantly, so we also have, the catalog, right? So the certified products and all that other stuff. So if I look here for Red Hat OpenShift platform, right, there's the certified operator catalog. The things that are listed on here do not have to be certified. So for example, if I find NetApp here, I don't think that Trident is certified with OpenShift. We can look and see, right? I come here to operators and operator hub, and search for Trident. So yeah, Astra Trident shows up as a community operator, but it's on this page of things that are, that are supported and work with OpenShift virtualization. And that's because the ecosystem team, right, they understand that there are challenges sometimes and reasons why our ecosystem, of partners cannot do certification, right? NetApp has some very good reasons why they are choosing not to do the certification. But they have attested that it is fully supported. They will support OpenShift and OpenShift virtualization as workloads and help all of our customers and all that other stuff. So, they're on this list of things. Let's see. Yeah, NetApp came on the stream. Yep, Caston was also on the stream. Oh, that's you. Sorry, I wasn't reading the name. I was just reading the comment. Okay, so we got through the GUI-based stuff, which was the first slide. So let's look at what else we got here. Workload density with safe memory over commitment. So historically, and the word safe here is really important. So historically, when creating virtual machines, we have always reserved the full amount of memory for those virtual machines. Okay, so if I come over here and look at virtual machines, I'm going to switch over to the virtualization. So if I look at my virtual machines and I look at this guy, right? So you can see it's been assigned 1 CPU and 2 gigabytes of memory. And if I were to look at the YAML down here, what I'm going to see is, well, it might not be in the VM YAML, but it'll be in the pod. Anyways, there's a resource request for the full amount of the memory associated with it, right? We don't do overcommitment of memory for virtual machines. And the reason why we haven't done that is because when the physical nodes come under memory pressure, basically the only option, if they cannot evict that workload fast enough, is to terminate the pod. Right? So the out of memory kill process kicks in and it does its thing and says, did something just happen? My headset just beeped at me. I'm going to assume you can hear me.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I can say. Yeah. It did change though. Okay.
I'm going to post this link in here for Jacob. red.ht/works with virt. What was I saying? So basically, if the physical node comes under memory pressure, the only option it has is to out of memory kill, right, whatever the processes until it gets it back under control. Soft eviction can help, right? Soft eviction, you can configure it for a threshold, so say 98% of memory, and it will try and reschedule and live migrate those virtual machines away. If it can't take action fast enough, they're still subject to being terminated. Non-gracefully. Clearly not a good thing for virtual machines. So with 4.17, what we've added is the ability to do swap for virtual machines. So if I come down here and it's here, configuring higher VM workload density. So it does still say technology preview. Here, I believe that is due to be removed, this big block, because it is supported. That block is due to be removed shortly. So we use a thing called WASP agent. No, I do not know what WASP is short for, and I cannot find that anywhere. So if anybody knows, I'd be interested. Anyways, we use this thing called WASP agent in order to basically support swap for our virtual machines. So following the documentation here, you see it goes through and deploys the daemon set onto each of the nodes. We configure this fail swap on as false. And then we also go through and we create a machine config that configures a swap file. And after that, so what that daemon set does, if you're interested in how this works under the covers, so what that daemon set does is it looks at the pods that are running on the node, and if it sees a virtual machine with a QoS class of burstable, it turns swap on for it. And then it prevents certain actions from happening, so that fail swap. So it won't terminate those. And then, so the node comes under memory pressure. The VMs begin to swap. When that happens, the WASP agent will trigger those to live migrate away to other nodes that are hopefully not under memory pressure at that point in time. Do we support live migration with SRIOV attached to VM? I don't think so, but I don't know the answer to that for sure. I'll have to double check on that one. So swap is great. We've used swap for a long time. It's sort of core and central to a lot of overcommitment strategies in that regard. think probably a couple of important things to be aware of here. So one, it only works with virtual machines. So if there is other workload running on the cluster, and you have a mix of container-based applications, virtual machines running on that same node, those other pod-based things, if it comes under memory pressure, can still be terminated, just like they always have. The other thing, if you saw down here, and I know I probably scrolled past it pretty fast, we are creating, if you use the default unit that they created here, we're just creating a regular swap file on var temp, right? So if you think of other virtualization solutions, Rev, VMware, etc., they create the VM swap files in the data store. So it's using whatever storage is coming from whatever storage array. With OpenShift virtualization, it's using the host local disks. So just make sure you account for that capacity and potentially those IOPS if it's running, if you're using it inside of your cluster. Yeah, swap, way of spelling swap. Yeah, that would be interesting. So if you happen to see on the slide here, there's a couple of other things to help with memory overcommitment, or I'll say memory resources inside of the cluster. So the existing two, and these have both been supported for a few releases now, key same page merging, or KSM. Effectively what this does is it deduplicates memory. So if I've got 100 RHEL 9 virtual machines running on the same host, they're probably going to have a few hundred megabytes of the same things loaded in memory. So rather than having 100 instances of that, it deduplicates it down. So that way we save resources there. Just be aware, and you can see the when column there on the far right. It really works best when there's lots of duplicates, data being stored in memory. And two, this is often security teams sometimes have issues with this, right? Because it leads to the same region of memory being shared by multiple virtual machines. And there's a lot of different reasons why that's not a good thing. So before turning it on, if you like your security team, maybe just check with them. So the other one is free page reporting or ballooning. So note that this has been turned on by default for a few releases now, so you're probably already using it. And all that does is when the guest OS is no longer using a region of memory, the balloon driver just notifies the hypervisor that it's available for it to use again. So the way that I usually think of this is, if I don't know, oh, it's not installed here. I go to the console here and I log into my virtual machine. Copy that. Did you finish booting? What's happening here?
I love your generated VM name.
Yeah. Oh, look, my VM has failed. That's interesting. Well, that's not good. We'll create a new one. Create from instance type. I want to create a RHEL 9 virtual machine. Oh, another thing, you'll notice we have these overcommitted. There's now new instance types that are available. So we'll create another one of these. This one is Amethyst Pike. I'm going to choose that storage class, and we will create the virtual machine. So anyways, what I wanted to show here is if you do something like a free-m, typically what you'll see is, memory in use and then like memory that's cached and memory available and stuff like that. Basically, if it's not using that memory, it just frees it and it returns it back to the OS. The caveat being, one, you need the ballooning driver, which comes with the QEMU tools. So the guest OS does need to support having that driver inside of there. And two, it's still an overcommitment technique. So you can still end up in a scenario where, less than ideal things are happening in that case. So swap is our pressure relief valve. Swap is the everything else has failed, and I'm still experiencing out of memory condition. So let the VM swap to disk temporarily while we move it to a host that is not having issues in that regard. Let's see, workload distribution and balancing. So this is a really fun one. So for a while now, gosh, I think maybe even like 10 releases, we have had a descheduler profile for virtualization that has been in tech preview. The problem was there was some issues with the descheduler and the descheduler profile that were causing it to enter into race conditions occasionally. So they finally got that fixed. So what's interesting here is that the descheduler in combination with eviction policies mean that we can distribute and balance resources in the cluster to a degree. Now, I want to be clear here of this is not like a precise, like it's every node is always going to be exactly, 30% utilized or exactly 40% utilized. Rather, it keeps node utilization inside of a window. And you can see there on this graphic, by default, it's going to be more than 20% utilized, but less than whatever the eviction policy threshold is set for. And it's probably hard to read on the slides, but it says 9x% for 90 something percent. I put it on the slide like that because you don't want to have a generic, oh, at 90%, the node is considered full and we want to begin evicting workload. Well, if you have a physical server that has 4 terabytes of memory, right, 10% of that is 400 gigabytes of memory, right? That's a lot of memory to just never have access to. So in that instance, maybe you want to set it to like 98% or 99%. So that way, it can use up more of those resources. Kubernetes supported live migration with SRI views. Oh, since 2021. Thank you, Alexander. So there you go. So eviction policy takes action at the top end. So once the node starts reaching that point of being or starting to run out of resources, it will take action to move those off. I will say specifically for memory as well as disk space on the host, so inodes, etc. on the node. The descheduler takes action on the other end of that spectrum. So if the cluster has nodes that are under 20% utilized and over 50%, I'm using default configured values. You can modify these and customize these if you choose. So if there are nodes that are under 20% and over 50%, the descheduler will go to those nodes that are over 50% and trigger live migrations, with the ideal or expected outcome being when it gets rescheduled to go somewhere else in the cluster, it will land on one of those nodes that is under 20% utilized, therefore freeing resources on the overused node and consuming resources on the underutilized node. So I pointed out eviction policies are specific for memory and disk space, not CPU, right? So the descheduler policy is what takes action when there is CPU contention happening on the hosts. So without the descheduler policy, if you don't configure this, you can have a node that has 100% CPU utilization. It's throttling like crazy, right? The guest OSs and the applications are suffering, and it won't take any action. The descheduler is what you need in order to do that. So make sure, definitely recommend configuring that inside of your cluster for, especially for production workloads. Let's see. And I did configure it inside of here. I think I said at the very beginning. My cluster overview go. So that's why this is showing up as degraded, because misconfigured descheduler. So there is a setting that you have to add into the descheduler in order for that to work. So the setting, essentially, the descheduler assumes that the pods that it's descheduling respond and are terminated on the source a lot faster than what happens with a live migration. So we have to tell the descheduler, like, cool it, to take a little bit of extra time. It's okay if these pods exist for a few minutes while the memory copy and everything else is happening with a live migration. Can we use SROV interfaces as a bridge interface for a VM? As far as I know, yes. InfiniBand, I don't know. I see you writing, Johnny. I'm assuming you're writing these down.
I'm taking the questions, yeah.
Yeah. Switching back to slides real quick. Day 2 manageability. So this is a fun one. So this is tech preview with OpenShift 4.17. And what this is it gives us the ability to do a live migration, so a non-disruptive migration for the virtual machine disks between storage classes, right? So all of the reasons why you would want to move a virtual machine disk from, say, one data store to another data store, you probably have those for moving between storage classes as well, right? Most of the CSI drivers, they use storage classes in order to define feature sets. Here is the performance SLA associated with it. Here's the disk type associated with it. Oftentimes, those also represent things like capacity, right? This storage class is associated with this set of RAID groups or something on my backing storage array. And of course, that has finite capacity. So, hey, I need to move my VM disk from storage class A to storage class 1 for whatever reason. Now we can do that. Tech preview, so not supported yet, but now we can do that with virtual machines. And I can show you what that looks like. So inside of my cluster, I have configured this according to the documentation. And in particular, I think, let's see, where is the documentation for this at? I don't remember where the documentation for this is at. I say I configured it. I actually configured it before, and so I was going based off of the pull requests on the OpenShift docs GitHub repo. So I don't actually know where it's at in the menu, which is kind of hilarious. Anyways, the way that you do this is using the migration toolkit for containers, MTC. So with MTC, we go in and we turn on the option, as well as on the OpenShift virtualization CRD, we turn on the option there. So if I go to installed operators and virtualization, and here, I know this is YAML, so it's going to be, gross. There is a way to do this in the GUI when you create the thing, but somewhere down and through here is one of these where it gives the turns on the option to do live migration. Why am I not seeing it?
There's live migration config right there.
Yeah. Anyways, oh, because there's a lot more down here. It's one of the feature gates. I don't remember which one.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, it's down here somewhere in amongst all of these things. Trust me, it's turned on. So once we have Migration Toolkit for virtualization installed, we use that console in order to do the movement. So what I need here is routes, and I want for the migration, migration. So this is my Migration Toolkit for Containers interface. So if I come here to Migration Plans, we'll get rid of this guy because we don't need him. So I'm going to add a migration plan. We'll just call this one AOA demo because I'm feeling very creative today. Migration type, we're going to select a storage class conversion, right? Convert PVs to a different storage class within the same cluster and namespace. Note that this is important. We cannot change clusters or namespaces as we do this migration. And then the source cluster is going to be the cluster that this is currently running on, which for whatever reason we always call host within the migration toolkits. For my projects, I'm looking for the virtual machines project. See here that I have virtual machines. It's going to go through and detect which virtual machines, or sorry, which persistent volumes exist inside of here. So I want the Amethyst Pike virtual machines disk. So here's the PVC associated with it. And I'm going to move this into the, I can't see all of it. It's cut off by the very long name. I'm going to move this into the Ceph RBD virtualization storage class. So you see right now it's just in the regular RBD. I want RBD virtualization. So I'll select that one. And then I will select this checkbox. So notice basically we're saying in order to live migrate the virtual machine, which is necessary for a non-disruptive storage migration, we need to have at least 2 nodes in the cluster. Okay, there is warnings. Thank you. That's great. So now that I've created the migration plan, I go to stage my migration. So we will click that. Let's shrink that back down so it's a little more readable. Alexander, not in the HCOCR yet. Is that the one for storage live migration? I realized that was a few minutes ago, so I was probably talking about that at the time. But I swear that I had to add a thing for that somewhere. This is what happens when I multitask.
Yes. Or set passwords. Yeah.
Yeah. Stage succeeded. So you see that we're finished with the staging of the migration plan, and then I can go and do the cutover for that. Select yes. So if I select this option here, so this migrations, and then we see that we're at the cutover stage, so I can select this guy, and we can see what's happening inside of here. So running rsync pods to migrate the persistent volume data. Here in a moment, when this view details pops back in, I will be able to click that, and I'll be able to see what precisely is happening inside of here. So after a few moments, it'll come through, and it'll have a progress bar of how far it's gotten through this. So when I did this the other day, what's today, Wednesday? I did this Monday. There we go. It's now in the running status. It took it about 10 minutes to copy my virtual machine over and have it in a new storage class. Yeah, can you do the cutover without doing staging first, Alexander? I don't know if you can or not. I've always done staging and then cutover every time I've used MTC for however long MTC's been around. So this may be, Andrew, what do they call those? Boxcar or no, train car cults, something. It's like where you do something just because you've always done it that way, or because other people have always done it that way, so you don't really know why you do it. You just do it that way. So I've just always done stage first, and I've never tried it without doing it. Yeah, don't need staging for live migration. Well, there you go. Thank you, Alexander. So it's running, it's doing its thing. I'm sure that there's a pod running somewhere where I could go and see more detailed logs and stuff like that. But for now, I just need the percentage, and it'll tell me how far it's going. And eventually it'll get to the point where it cuts over. Again, it's non-disruptive. So it works beautifully.
No, it's just like the Windows update counter where it'll go up and then slide back and then...
Yeah, you have 3 minutes, 3,000 days, 30 seconds, all within the same counter. Let's see. Oh, two-site disaster recovery. So this is an OpenShift feature that is important for bare metal clusters and therefore OpenShift virtualization clusters. So with 4.17, it is now fully supported, generally available to have 4 and 5 node control plane architectures. So historically, it's always been either 1 node, single node OpenShift, or 3 nodes with OpenShift 4, right? So 3 node is sort of the default, the minimum that you need for high availability. I can lose one of those nodes and still be able to recover my cluster, or my cluster still continues to function normally. It's relatively straightforward to recover from. So now we are adding support for additional control plane nodes inside of there. So why is this important? So one, you can see here, the failure tolerance goes up to 2 when I'm using a 5-node cluster. However, you'll also notice that with both of these architectures, I need 3 nodes for quorum. So I can lose 1 node with the 4-node configuration and still have a fully functional OpenShift cluster. If I lose 2 nodes, now I have broken quorum, so I need to recover a node before it can come back. So this is important from the perspective of disaster recovery, and in particular when I'm spanning clusters across sites. So if I have, let's assume that this is a division, right? Site 1 and site A. If I lose one of the sites with the 5-node configuration, just like with a 3-node configuration, I may or may not retain quorum, right? There's a 50-50 chance that the site that has quorum is the site that survives, and therefore everything continues like normal. However, because I have, extra copies, regardless of which one it is, it's faster and easier for me to get back to quorum, right? So down here, I have a consistent failure mode. So it doesn't matter which site fails, the recovery process is the same. Up here, I have to put a little bit of extra thought of, is this a site that has 3 nodes or 2 nodes that survived? So just extra resiliency, Andrew's personal opinion, Jonny, please chime in as well. 4 and 5 nodes, I think, is particularly important for hosted control planes clusters. And I say that because hosted control planes clusters become a central point for a lot of things. Right? If that one cluster goes down, then it's potentially affecting a lot of other clusters. So I want to protect that as much as possible. One thing I will point out, though, is adding additional etcd or additional control plane nodes does not increase performance, right? Because the way that Raft protocol works, I now have to have more acts and more, from the member or the following nodes, the member nodes, before I can commit data. So adding more nodes adds resiliency and redundancy. It does not increase performance. Cargo cold. Thank you, Alien B. That is exactly what I was thinking. Slides back because the VM is running and causing changes. Yep. Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was just going to read this out for those that are listening, right? Like where Alexander's saying that, the staging doesn't do anything like for the HCO config. So he was specifically talking about the cutover, and that you don't need staging for live migration, and then it's a no op if you do from staging. Staging is for offline migration. So just for those that are listening, Alexander's referring to the live migration CR where we're trying to find the config in there to allow the storage class stuff. So
there you go. Okay, smart people in the audience, and I know Alexander is a part of the team for that. So thank you again. So yes, so 4 and 5 node control plane architectures, they're important. They do add value. Just be aware of the reasons why you're choosing to do one of those options, and it is focused on resiliency and recovery, not around performance. Let's see. Workload disruption. So this is another OpenShift feature that is relevant for virtualization admins. Notice that it is in tech preview. So this is what they're referring to as node disruption policies as opposed to pod disruption policies. So the point here is that I can, as the administrator, I can go in and I define a policy that says, for each one of these actions, so replacing a file on the file system or adding a new unit to the host for any reason that I'm doing that using machine config, right? I can define what the behavior is for that action on the node. So historically, most things result in a reboot of the node, right? Machine config doesn't really know and was never, I'll say, empowered to make decisions about, does this cross the threshold of are we willing to reboot the node or not? There are a few exceptions. So I think things like replacing SSH keys doesn't require a reboot. There's a handful of other things. But now we've made it so that, and again, tech preview, so not fully supported yet, but now you'll be able to go in and say, for this thing, all I want to do is, restart a service, or I don't want you to take any action. I'm just putting a configuration file on the host. Whereas previously, putting an arbitrary file somewhere on the host would result in a reboot. Even though no reboot is clearly necessary for that. And I think that's in the documentation. Node disruption. Yeah, using node disruption policies. So if you want an example of what that looks like, if we come down here to the examples, this is what it looks like. So here's my cluster policies, right? So for anything happening on this particular file, the action is none, right? Put it, in machine config, when I overwrite this file or when I place this file, it's going to place that file, and then machine config operator will not reboot the host. Right down here, if we're putting in a new certificate, or new certificate here for the cryo. I just offended everybody by mispronouncing it both correctly and incorrectly in all the ways. So it's going to, when I modify this file, it's going to reload the cryo service. Right? So I just have different actions here that are available to me. Here, nm state within the OpenShift path, right? You don't need to do anything from inside of there. This means that I can push nm state configuration out through machine config and not have the host be rebooted if I so choose. That would not be the way to push out nm state config, by the way. Using the nm state operator is the correct way to do that. So interesting set of configurations. Again, this gives us pretty granular control over the things that affect our clusters. Andrew's personal opinion, bare metal takes ages to reboot. When I was going through an enabling swap on my cluster, it took upwards of 20 minutes to just go in and do the one-shot, create the swap file thing, just because it had to go in on each node and create the file or lay out the unit file and then reboot the node so that the next time it started, the unit was run. And in reality, I didn't need to do that, right? I could have used node disruption policies and had it go through and just apply it without doing a reboot. So one of those important things. Cluster expansion. I talked about this one a little bit before. So in 4.17, generally available is what I'm calling the ISO install experience for adding nodes to OpenShift clusters. So simple version, you can see over here on the right-hand side. As the administrator, I go and I run a command that creates an ISO file. And that I boot the node to that ISO file and it comes up, it comes online, and then it comes into, I would see it appear in the cluster interface. I approve the CSR and it joins the cluster. So if you're familiar with doing UPI type installs or manually adding nodes to a cluster, right, historically it would be, I need to boot the RCOS ISO, and then I point it at a ignition file and go through this whole process. Now all of that is consolidated into one. So why I think this is important is it gives us kind of two consistent ways of adding nodes to clusters depending on the method that I choose, that I want. So one is the ISO, right? Doesn't matter if I deployed bare metal or a non-integrated cluster. It also works with vSphere and I think a few other things. I can use this experience if I don't have access to a BMC, right? So regardless of my cluster type, regardless of the platform, I boot it to an ISO, I have a new worker node. If I can access a BMC, so baseband management controller, IDRAC, ILO, blah, 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 depending on your vendor, with that, I can use the bare metal operator to add nodes. So this works with bare metal clusters, whether they are integrated, so platform equals bare metal, or not, platform equals none. And the way that works, if I come down here to compute and bare metal hosts, when I want to add a new cluster, I don't remember what namespace this goes in, all projects. So when I want to add a new host to the cluster, and yes, I know all of these are erroring, this isn't actually going to work. What I would do is come in and give it the boot MAC address, give it the other information here. When I click create, the cluster reaches out through the BMC and basically ingests that node. And it becomes an option, right? It shows up in this list of things where I can then go in and I can add it to my cluster if I so choose, right? So
does it basically just do I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Does it basically just do like an introspection? So it goes out, connects to the BMC, takes it all in, does like the, like in OpenStack used to do it back in the day where it would do like an introspection and pull all that stuff in.
Bare metal operator is based on metal cubed or metal 3, which is really ironic. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
On the back end. So you can see, when I add the bare metal host, it'll go out and it'll inventory what's happening on the host. So here's the network adapters that are on my node. Here's the disks that are on my node, right? All that other stuff. And then when I want to join it to my cluster, I can come here to machines and basically I create the machine. So if I have machine sets, so if I do happen to be using a bare metal integrated cluster, machine sets, I can go in and I can scale this up and it will take one of those bare metal hosts in order to meet that need. So one strange quirk of this is fully supported and documented inside of OpenShift. And it has been for several releases now. Strangely, it is documented in the install docs. So if I come down here, if I go to install, and then it is deploying installer provision clusters on bare metal. And if I go to expanding the cluster, nope, that's not the one I want. Installing on bare metal, here we go. Scaling a user provisioned installation with the bare metal operator. So this is the process that we follow in order to do that. So you can see it says, if you don't have the bare metal operator already installed, right, here's how to deploy the bare metal operator. Once that's inside of there, we go in and we create our bare metal host object. Once we create that, it inventories the host and adds it into the bare metal hosts section there. And then from there, I can go in and I can add it to my cluster. So Andrew's opinion, this is the way to do it if you have bare metal with BMC, and it provides that consistent experience for doing that. If you don't have BMC and you're not using, machine sets for like vSphere or something like that, then using the ISO-based method is the alternative. Check on chat here just to see if there's anything.
Yep, we're all caught up.
Okay. Network isolation for namespaces. So this one doesn't apply to virtualization yet. So they talked about this in the what's new. So this is one that I think will be important for virtualization when it's supported with virtualization. So notice that it's technology preview with 4.17.0, and then the Virt team is working on adding support for it. What this does is it allows us to create private networks between the nodes. So it's effectively an overlay network that is private to those pods and virtual machines that can also access the outside world. So today, when you use a OVN secondary network with the L2 topology, you can create that L2 adjacent or same broadcast domain network, overlay network inside of there, but it cannot access the outside world. So this adds in a number of additional features, Be a really cool one. I'm very anxious to see this one come to fruition. I think it's an amazing feature, and it's one that I'm very excited for. So keep an eye out for it. There's a bunch of stuff that's happening in networking that's going to be we're going to be very busy on networking things, Jonny, for the next few releases.
Yeah. Well, I'm just seeing that right now, and I mean, even when it's going through the what's new, I was thinking it's gonna be cool seeing how that ties into Scupper, Submariner, all these other projects to see just to see what if it hooks in, and then how it hooks in, and how you can use it as a skill. I mean, yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, speaking of other things, did you notice that I need to find the link, but the Service Interconnect folks released a solution pattern to do non-disruptive or less disruptive migrations.
Nice.
redhat.com/architect. Oh, what happened? The redirect now comes here. That's weird. All right, I'll have to see if I can find that link somewhere. Can I find it in the next 15 seconds while I'm talking to myself here? Here we go. Turns out I can. So minimize downtime when migrating from hypervisors to OpenShift virtualization. So this just uses Service Interconnect. I say just uses. So Service Interconnect is an abstraction for connecting endpoints together. So in Red Hat virtualization, I've got an application and I've got web servers that are talking to a database server. And so I configure those web servers to access the database server by referencing the Service Interconnect endpoint, which just redirects it back down to the database server, right? But let's say that I want to move that database from Red Hat virtualization into OpenShift virtualization. Maybe there's an IP change, maybe there's not. It doesn't matter because the Service Interconnect piece will keep everything connected together and abstract any of those changes away from the application. Maybe at the same time, or maybe the following week, we say, oh, having this database in a virtual machine doesn't make any sense. Let's put it into a container database instance, right? SQL Server in a container, MariaDB in a container, whatever that happens to be, instead of in a virtual machine. Okay, I make that change on the database side, and Service Interconnect updates the connection, and the application is none the wiser. So really cool set of features. I mean, it's the native Service Interconnect functionality, but it's really cool from an application perspective of I don't have to care about my infrastructure and where it's at. The application just does its thing. So here, I'll paste this link into the chat here and publish that out. Go take a look at that. So VAMC did a great job. It's always I've seen it demoed a couple of times, and it's always a fun one.
That's awesome. We had those guys on too a long time ago, right? Jack? Is it Jack that's the product manager for that, or it used to be?
I don't know. I'm terrible with names. Terrible. I think I've only got a couple of things left here. This is another one. So ACM is adding a lot of new things over the next few releases to do with virtualization. So the first ones to be aware of here are just improved dashboards and alerting. observability generically for virtual machines. So you can quickly and easily find all your virtual machines. You can see the status. You can see down here comprehensive VM alerting. So it doesn't matter if it's one cluster or 30 clusters, everything comes into one place, ACM, and you can see it from there. Additionally, they've added some features to be able to do virtual machine management from the ACM console. So not only can I go in and say, show me all of the virtual machines that are in, cluster 7 or that have this label associated with them, or, whatever those things happen to be, all the normal things you can query with ACM. But now I can do things like start, stop, and restart those virtual machines. I can edit the virtual machine from inside of there as well. So I don't have to go out of the ACM interface over to the cluster and into the virtualization view to then go and edit my virtual machine.
That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah. And last but not least, why did I add this one in here? I don't remember. Hosted control planes. Just generic improvements to hosted control planes. I say generic. They aren't generic. There's a lot of really cool things happening here. I'm just not remembering why I added this one specifically.
The one thing I can tell you about like this slide, just from my perspective, is the single pane of glass. Like I think since 2.6, the MCE 2.6, the clusters are automatically imported into the multi-cluster engine UI. So like when you go to all clusters, now you can see them and they're actually automatically imported. And so it just makes it that much nicer when you're dealing with the clusters and stuff like that, because beforehand you would just build them, and then if you wanted to import them, you actually had to go through the manual process of importing them into the UI and all that stuff. So now it actually does it for you.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And it uses STS credentials versus like the typical AWS file or whatever environment variables. It's using the short token, whatever it's called. So at first I was annoyed with it, but now I've gotten used to it, and I'm like, okay, this is the way it should be.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm happy to see that. And also, as I'm staring at the slide, I realize why I added it. It's that middle bullet, this thing right here, virtualization provider with NVIDIA GPUs.
Boom.
We talked about that at the start. I just forgot that I had added the slide in that talks about it specifically. So I think that's all the slides I had for this. Yeah, after this it goes into 4.16, but 4.16 it's not new anymore, right? It's the old new. So we won't go into that one.
Yeah, now we're on new. We're on shiny new.
Yeah. So yeah, OpenShift virtualization. It's I don't know. I've been working with it. I've been using it for a long time now, and I am super happy to see the maturity that's happening and just the focus of kind of across the product. And I don't mean just OpenShift virtualization. I mean across OpenShift and ACM and others of improving the usability and user experience. So I know that there's a huge focus, across a lot of different areas. So not just literally the UI, but also like the docs team is working on how to make things better. The ACM team and how you use and manage the clusters. Again, not just UI based things, but across the board, everybody's working to make it better. And there's just so many things that I'm excited to see over the next few versions as we mature on these things. So.
Yeah, it's come a long way, man. It is awesome.
Yeah, and congrats to all the teams that are involved. And I say that, not that we shouldn't say congratulations, every time there's a release that happens, because, there's hundreds and hundreds of engineers that work across all of these things. And, it's not, it's hard to give everyone, recognition for all the different things. We tend to summarize it up into big themes and stuff like that and skim over all the, all the individual work that all of those things are propped up on. Right. But yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. Well done.
Stop the screen share here, so that way we can stop looking at all of the awful error messages that are happening inside of my cluster. And every time I see that, I'm like, why is it red? Like it's this like ingrained like Pavlovian response of like red means I need to fix it.
It's cluster character. That's all.
Yeah. So all right, y'all. So if you have any questions, we'll wind down here. If you have any last minute questions, be sure to get those into the chat here. You can also, again, hit up Jonny and I on email, Sully, SULLY at redhat.com, or Jonny, JONNY at redhat.com. We love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. As always, we are also on the Kubernetes Slack. So you can go to slack.kubernetes.io to get an invite over there if you're not already there. And there is an OpenShift-users channel where there's a few thousand of our closest friends. Aside from that, I think that's all I got. That's our normal spiel, isn't it, Jonny?
Yep. I'm gonna post the superhero link one more time, and then put it up here. I don't know if you can actually. Okay, awesome. So please nominate one of your cohorts.
Good luck typing that out. Just reading it from the screen.
Yeah. I'll read it out loud if you'd like, and then.
Can you do it phonetically?
Oh no, you don't want that, because then I'll mess up, and then I'll forget where I'm at, and then Sailor Jonny will actually come right back out. So, so just to real quick go over the schedule. So Sully, next week we can actually finally do the disconnected part 2. I did verify, like literally right as we were coming on, that everything's working. So I just have to scale it down so that way it can run on my laptop. And then after that, on the 30th, we have the UX team coming in, and so they're going to talk about some user experience things that they're doing in the console for OpenShift virtualization and GitOps. And so that's going to be really awesome. I met Peter in Florida last month, and yeah, it's an awesome guy. Gonna have to give him a hard time about his bike. He's got this huge 2-person bicycle that he rides around on. It is awesome. And so yeah, I was completely impressed with it. Like yeah, it's awesome. And then
by himself, or were you riding the tandem bike with him?
Oh, I totally would have, dude. If he had it there, I would have totally ridden it. Yeah. And I would have been on the back. I'd have been, yeah, it would have been, I would have made it as awkward as possible. But in November, we also have the ACM team coming on, and they're going to come on and they're going to talk about the global hub. And I believe that's the first or second week in November. It might be the third. I'll have to check for sure. But I'm also going to reach back out to the observability team and see when they can come on. And so we've got a lot of things coming up. We also have a what's new with OpenShift 4.17, some extra stuff I think that we're going to try and jump into. And then we have KubeCon. So there's a bunch coming up, a bunch of things coming up. And I got your question earlier about the OpenShift serverless. I'll reach out to to that team and see if they want to come on and talk about it, and then see if it makes sense. That's it for me.
Sandy, for your question there, so yes, you absolutely can connect virtual machines directly to a network. You don't need to connect the VM to the pod network or to the SDN. I'm looking to see if my cluster does not have any additional networks configured. So I can show you what that looks like real quick here. I won't be able to actually do it because I don't have any extra networks configured, but you'll see what it looks like. So this is my virtualization. Here we'll switch over to the virtualization tab. So virtual machines, I'm going to use a template because that's the easiest way, in my opinion, to customize these. We'll go with rel 9. I'm going to customize the virtual machine. So under network interfaces, I can select this and go edit. And then if I had an additional network configured, I would be able to choose it from here. So how do I configure those additional networks? So if I come down here to networking, and I'm going to, what does the network state of these look like? Here's a BRAX. So I'm going to quickly create I'm going to see if this works. So what we've done is on these particular nodes, there is a secondary, actually that's not a secondary one, that's the main one. So maybe I won't mess with it too much. Anyways, what you would do is you would create a node network configuration policy and an OVS that rides on top of, say, a bridge, or excuse me, a bond. So I would take ENO1 and ENO2 here. I would create a bond out of those, using LACP or something like that. I would then create an OVS bridge on top of that. And then from there, I would create a network attachment definition. So that network attachment definition, and we can give it, so I'll call it like VLAN 123. Right? Network type is going to be OVN Kubernetes secondary network. So the bridge mapping, so let's call this, maybe I created, OVS BR dash, ABC, making things up because none of this actually exists. And then I can give it a VLAN ID of 123. So I will create this. It might fail. It won't actually work. But when I create this, right, I now have this VLAN 123 network attachment definition available. So this time, when I come back to my virtual machines and create a virtual machine, we'll just go with this guy and go back to the same thing. I can select my VLAN 123, and when I do this, it would connect that VM's network adapter directly to the outside world, right? VLAN 123, or whatever that happens to be. So this is how you would do that. You can do that with multiple network interfaces. So not required to use the SDN if you don't want to for those virtual machines. There's something else that I was going to show, and it has slipped my mind, so must not have been important. Oh, I know what it was. So we have an example of this. If we go to red.ht/virtref guide. So this KCS article has a reference implementation guide for OpenShift virtualization. And if you scroll down through here, we have examples of everything that I just talked about. So here's the reference implementation as I scroll down through here. So here is a node network configuration policy that shows creating a bond using 802.3 AD, so LACP. And then, so here's bond 1, and then down below, we've got our node network configuration policy that goes and creates the OVS on top of that. So here is my OVS with the OVN bridge for each one of my VLANs. And then last but not least, we have our network attachment definition for each one of those VLANs inside of there. I'm showing it as YAML in here, but this is just the CLI, the YAML version of what I showed in the GUI. So it walks through each one of these things and shows you all of that. Just pasting the link here. VirtRef guide. So we will paste that in there in case anybody's interested. And we do keep that up to date, or we try to keep it up to date. It is not up to date for 4.17 yet, because 4.17 released literally 24 hours ago. But we are in the process of updating that to include all the new things inside of there. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to send them directly to me. So I'll make sure that the team gets those and can help answer any questions. So thank you for the question, Sandeep. All right. Well, thank you everybody who joined us live today. Appreciate all of the questions, all of the chat. Again, we always love to hear from y'all. If you're not watching us live, don't hesitate to reach out. So Jonny, Jonny at redhat.com, or Sully, Suly at redhat.com. Every time I say that in my head, I always want to say Jonny twice, just to see if anybody sends you extra email.
Or Sully, Jonny at redhat.com.
Yes, send me all the emails, all of them. My email address is Jonny at redhat.com. Especially if it's hate mail, Jonny at redhat.com.
That's right. That's right. There's actually a load balancer on Jonny at redhat.com that it equally distributes mail to us. So.
Yeah. So, all right, y'all. We will see you next week talking about Disconnected, or the conclusion of the Disconnected saga.
Yep, it'll be a long live stream too. So
Okay.
because we're gonna recap.
Saga makes it sound very dramatic too.
It's gonna be so awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna use Saga.
All right, so thank you everybody for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. Jonny, I will leave last words with you.
Yeah, awesome presentation, Andrew. Thanks for putting it together last minute, and to the audience, thank you for joining and all the questions and comments and everything. We feed off of it. Hopefully you can tell, it was amazing. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you next week.